You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, and welcome to another episode of SLA Insights. My name is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and we're continuing the discussion of how to learn languages well, especially ancient languages, thinking biblical Hebrew, biblical Greek, Latin, the so-called dead languages. And I just finished a series on reading and what it means to read and how to read well. And we're transitioning now into vocabulary learning, vocabulary acquisition, because vocabulary acquisition is such an important component for reading fluency. In the previous episode, I discussed the importance of vocabulary for reading fluency, talking about rapid and accurate word recognition as a foundation, a building block for getting us to comprehension and interpretation. So now as we move into vocabulary acquisition, I'm going to be talking a little bit more today about what it means to know a word. And so we're going to be looking at vocabulary acquisition from a little more theoretical point of view. But as I'm going through this, I want you to be thinking about, if this is important for knowing a word, how might I teach it? Because we often, the go-to for vocabulary learning is flashcards. And the good news is second language acquisition research has confirmed that vocabulary learning is done well with flashcards. Flashcards is a great option for teaching, learning new vocabulary. But it's not the total picture. There's more to it, and we can't just stop at flashcards because learning a word is so complex. So today I'm going to talk about the complexities, what all is involved in knowing a word. What does it mean to know a vocabulary item? There are three basic components of knowing a word. That is, we need to know the form of the word, what it looks like. We need to know the meaning of the word, and we need to know the use of the word. And so I'm going to unpack these through the rest of this episode. But again, keep in mind and keep in the back of your head, how might I teach this? How might I help my students learn this aspect of knowing a word? So we're going to start with the form of the word. In other words, what it looks like on the page, but also what it sounds like. And so we want to start with phonological knowledge of the word. That is, what does it sound like? Like the word book in English, it sounds like book. But if you're reading it on a page, you also need to know what it sounds like, because as I've talked about before, reading, even silent reading, you use subvocalization. You're actually internally hearing that word, and the phonological component of the word is more important than we often realize. The second part of knowing the form of the word is the orthographic knowledge, what it looks like on the page. How is it spelled? What are the spelling variants, if there are any? So, for example, in English, the word color in American English is C-O-L-O-R, but in British English, it's C-O-L-O-U-R. And in Hebrew, we have a lot of extra letters that may or may not show up. And being aware that those vowel letters may be part of the spelling or may not, and could change the way the word looks on the page. Also part of knowing the form of the word is to know its words, the word parts, the base, the stem. So for example, the word law is the base for a number of words that don't really look like law, but are connected, like legal, paralegal, legality, lawyer. All of these words would be part of the word family. And again, that's another part of knowing the word parts, is understanding what word family the word is part of. So you want to know the base or the stem of the word. You also want to be aware of any affixes, prefixes, suffixes, infixes that may change the look of the word, the meaning of the word. So for example, going back to law, we have legal, we also have illegal. And that prefix is will change the meaning of the word and how it's used. And of course, the infamous anti-disestablishmentarianismist that has all kinds of affixes packed into one word. So those are the parts of the word that we need to know and be aware of to help us know the word better, more deeply, more thoroughly. So knowing the form of the word is the first part of knowing a vocabulary item. The second thing you need to know, besides the form of the word, what it looks like, what it sounds like, we also need to know the meaning of the word. And that seems self-evident, but think about understanding the concepts and the reference to that word. So think of an example from Proverbs 31. It talks about the woman of noble character who is reaching her hand to the distaff. Now, you can take a vocabulary card and put the Hebrew word on one side and the English word on the other, and there's a good chance your students still don't know what they're talking about, because distaff, even in English, is an unknown quantity for many of us who don't do spinning and weaving. And so understanding the concepts behind the word is going to be really important, not just being able to gloss it with a simple English. If you don't understand the English, it's not going to make sense either. So understanding what the word is referring to is going to be really important, not just being able to regurgitate a gloss back for it. You also want to be able to know the range of meaning. This is going to be more true for common words that take on a number of nuances and contexts. So, for example, in English, think of the word dark. The meaning of that word is going to change depending on what it's put with, what it's describing, and in what context. So we can have a dark color like black, but we can have a dark night. We have the dark ages, a dark mood, a dark day, which can have a couple of meanings, that it's actually dark or it's kind of ominous. And if you, like me right now, are thinking, now how would I teach this? This is a perfect place for word study, which is another way of encouraging the deeper learning of vocabulary. Okay, so far we've talked about learning the form of the word and the meaning of the word. Those are two important components of learning and acquiring vocabulary. The third and final aspect of knowing a word is to know the use of the word. So you want the basic grammatical function, of course. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adverb? How is it going to function very basically in the sentence? But then you also want to think and understand about collocations. In other words, words that will frequently appear together. Your cell phone, by the way, uses collocations to predict what word it thinks you're going to type next. So there are stock phrases and idioms like ulterior motive or bated breath. We rarely use ulterior or bated except in those stock phrases. And so with those, the collocations are pretty simple and straightforward. You know what's coming next. But in other cases, the collocations can have a wide range, but at the same time, they're usually limited. So for example, you can have a clear motive or a bad motive, but not a bumpy motive or a green motive. So there are limitations in what collocations you can put together, what words go together and what don't. And this all ties back into the use of the word. How is it used? Where is it used? Another example would be verbs that only take a certain preposition, or when it changes prepositions, it might use two or three. With one preposition, it means one thing. With a different preposition, it means something else. And so being aware of those word combinations and how they're used is important for understanding the meaning of a word. And then also, you want to think about constraints in how the word is used, when and where it is or isn't appropriate to use a particular word. In English, we'll think about slang or derogatory words or labels. You don't use them in certain contexts. Some of them shouldn't be used at all, but you know when to use them and when it's okay not to. use those words. And relatedly, register the appropriateness of a word given the sociocultural context. And by this, I'm talking, who are you speaking to? To whom are you speaking? Are you speaking to a superior, in which case you're going to be very careful with yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, please? Or are you speaking to an inferior, somebody who is below you, talking to the dog, get out of here, those are two different registers that we're going to use, or something different if I'm speaking to an equal. And in Hebrew especially, but also Greek and Latin, you're going to find different forms even used depending on the sociocultural context. And so you need to be aware of how the word is used in those contexts as well. Another might be the context of, for example, a taxonomy, where you have a hierarchical relationship between some words, like in the animal kingdom. You've got an animal, which is at one end of the spectrum. You narrow it down to mammal, narrow it down to cat, narrow it down to lion, narrow it down to African lion. And so this hierarchy of specificity, you also need to be aware of, and how to use which one, where, and when, and so on. So those are the three main aspects of knowing a word. How do you know it? How do you know it well? Vocabulary flashcards are a great way to go, and supported. And in an upcoming episode, I'm going to talk about how to make the best use of vocabulary flashcards. But understand that it's not a simple one and done. It's not like saying a math flashcard, for example, where 1 + 1 is 2. And you can put that on a flashcard, and that's really all you need to know. When you're working with vocabulary, it gets more complex. And so flashcards are really only the beginning of learning vocabulary and how to know a word. In future episodes, I'm going to talk about some more practical ways you can teach vocabulary, teach it more deeply, and beyond just flashcards. But for now, be thinking about how you would use this information, this more theoretical information, on the ground in your classroom. How do you get your students to know these vocabulary items more deeply? Because, again, by way of review, knowing a word is complex. You need to know the form of the word, you need to know the meaning of the word, you need to know the use of the word, and all of that, what that entails. So, because knowing a word is multifaceted, and because human memory is complex, there are several factors that can affect how well a student will know the word or learn a word, and how long he or she will retain that word once they've learned it. So the next episode, I'm going to be addressing some of these more complex issues of human memory and some of the benefits and constraints that we have with learning vocabulary, again, feeding into how to do this well. So I hope you can join me. In the meantime, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.